I'm Marsha Barnes. I am the Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Studies. And I would like to extend to all of you a very warm welcome on behalf of the Dean, Dean Justiz, as well as the whole college in terms of the Ed Talks. This is the second year for the Ed Talks, and they have been a resounding success. They have been a resounding success because of our wonderful assistant professors in the college across all of the departments. They have come together to start a group that puts on talks for everyone in the college and to foster some integration between faculty and students in the departments, between departments in the college. And this is a wonderful goal, and the College of Education is very pleased to support all of you in this, in meeting your goals. We are providing some funding this year, moral support, finding rooms, whatever you need, just let us know. We couldn't be more pleased. And we also are just amazed at the turnout today. Although, actually, I'm not that amazed because the speaker is Jenn Adair. And Dr. Sherry Field is going to introduce Jen. But just before she does that, I want to let you know that a very wonderful set of talks with internal and external speakers has been put together for this year. And there is a schedule here, and I am going to put it on the back table so that you can pick one up as you leave the room. So enjoy the talks throughout the year. We're very happy to see you here.
Thank you, Marsha. I want to say a few nice things about Jennifer before she talks. Importantly, Jennifer's a former preschool teacher. She completed her PhD at Arizona State University, and her research and teaching focuses on the role of race, culture, and cross-cultural experiences in early childhood education, with a particular focus on the experiences of teachers, parents, and children from immigrant communities. She's concerned with improving educational equity at all levels of early childhood education, particularly through the inclusion of project-based instruction and other agency-producing teaching learning approaches in the early grades. Her work has been published in many journals, such as Teachers College Record, the International Journal of Research and Method in Education, Race, Ethnicity, and Education, and Young Children. Jennifer has received many awards, including the Outstanding Article of the Year Award in early childhood teacher education. And in 2012, she was selected as a young scholar with the Foundation for Child Development to better understand how culturally relevant types of agency in early childhood education affects the social and academic development of Latino children of immigrants. Jennifer's work on her Spencer-funded grant, Civic Action and Learning with Young Children, combines cutting-edge research techniques with a focus on learning, obviously, and it's across multiple sites in the U.S., New Zealand, and Australia. Jennifer is as passionate about her teaching as she is her research. She regularly teaches in our ALD pre-service teacher program, and recently she revised a large play class for our students, and she regularly teaches that and supervises the graduate assistants who work with that. Last year, she hosted some Westwood High School AVID students in her classroom, and this is a little treat. If you haven't already seen it, I suggest you check out Jennifer's talk on KLRU's Blackademics TV. It's incredible. You can find the link at the bottom of the CNI webpage, and it shares an amazing passion coming from an incredible educator. Jennifer Adair.
Thank you. Okay, well, that was great for my self-esteem. Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. I do want to thank Marsha Barnes and Sherry Fields for that nice introduction. I also am really grateful for these ed talks. I have sat all through them last year and really enjoyed the contribution they've made to our intellectual community. I think sometimes we get so caught up in our teaching in our own worlds that we forget that we are a shared intellectual community trying to understand and improve education. So I'm grateful for that. What I'm going to share today is the culmination of about 6 years of research as part of a study called the Agency in Young Children Study. And this part of what I'm going to share today was just published this week, nicely, so conveniently, at Harvard Educational Review. So if you go to their webpage, our article is nicely the one that pops right up. But don't do it right now. Do this. But it is, a lot of this talk comes from that paper, and I want to take a second to recognize the co-authors. So Molly McManus, just raise your hand a little bit. So she is a graduate student who, as a master's student, walked into my office from Ed Psych, cross-departmental, and came in and said she liked the study I was doing, could she help? And she proceeded, that was a really smart move on her part, because she proceeded to be an integral part in data collection and analysis, and now the publishing of the work. The other person I really want to tell you about is Kiyomi Sanchez-Suzuki-Colgrove, who is my collaborator in all of this. She started this project with me in 2010 and has been writing with me through all of this project. So the mistakes that I make today are mine, but anything that resonates with you is definitely out of a shared collaborative experience. Okay, so I'm really interested in the connection between agency and power and childhood. And I'm particularly interested in how agency and power impacts what kind of experiences young children get to have at school. I don't think it's arbitrary who gets what. I think there's something deeper that's going on. And a lot of my work is trying to understand what contexts are like when children have an atypical experience with learning. They get a lot of freedom and agency in their learning. And I'm really interested in when that's restricted and why. So saying that, I want to start by talking a little bit about the story of our whole research project, the Agency in Young Children Project. And how this research goes, everything I'm going to show you except for one slide was nothing what we thought when we started. Everything we found out was new, which is sometimes exciting and sometimes terrifying if you find out something that you were not expecting and that doesn't involve or is not helped by any of the theory you prepared with. So you're like theoryless. No intellectual likes to be theoryless. So I'm going to tell the story of kind of what happened, the findings that put us into a real kind of situation of confusion and trying to understand, and how Charles Mills came onto the scene in our project, not physically, but his ideas, became part of our study, and how it helped us understand things a little bit differently. Some of you may be familiar with him, others may not, but I'm hoping to demonstrate not just a lot about Charles Mills, but also about how theory can act as just-in-time theory. This is what my mentor, Joe Tobin, would call it. When you're stuck and something has happened or something is going on in the work, either in the analysis or data collection, and you really don't understand why this is happening, that's when theory becomes really powerful and important. And that theory can be embodied theory, that theory can be written textual theory, but theory is that just-in-time theory is what I'm going to focus on today. Okay, so a little tiny bit about the project. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. But basically, I do something called video cued ethnography. I spend about a year in a classroom doing pretty traditional ethnography, where I'm spending time and participating and documenting lots of things that are happening in the classroom to understand the general routine. But as part of that year, I make a film, a 20-minute film, that shows a typical day in that space. So in our Agency in Young Children study, we looked for a classroom that served mostly children of Latinx immigrants, that was demographically living within the city. We also wanted a classroom where children had a lot of agency in their learning. They could make a lot of decisions. That was a hard task in and of itself, to be honest. But when we found it, we spent time with the teachers, helping them over the summer, supporting them in whatever they needed to get ready for the whole project. And then we stood back and we watched what happened. Because what we wanted to know in this study, our main research question was, when children have agency in their learning, how does that impact their social and academic development? That's what we wanted to know. So we spent a year in that classroom and watched these kids do these amazing things all year. And we made that film. And then the following year, we took that film to schools all throughout Texas, to schools that shared demographics within 10%. So we weren't going to like all different kinds of schools. We were going to schools that shared the demographics of the school we filmed. And when we went to those schools, we showed it to immigrant parents, mostly Latinx immigrant parents, and once in a while no, but for the most part. And there's about 100 parents involved. We showed it to first graders, 99 first graders. We showed it to pre-K through third teachers, most of them bilingual teachers, and then also administrators, so principals, superintendents. So when we took that film around, we asked everyone to help us watch the film and point out forms of agency, or when they saw children influencing what they were doing or making decisions about what they were doing in their learning. And people were able to produce a lot of information. So those purple circle are the researchers, our kind of predictions or ideas about what forms of agency they might point out. The red are teachers and administrators and the forms of agency that they pointed out when they watched the film, and the blue are the parents and the children. But I want to give you kind of an idea about what they were responding to. So I'm going to show you a clip in the film that is the scene that most people responded to and often responded to first. So it really stood out to them. So let's watch that for a second. Okay, there was a lot of Justin Bieber that year. There's a lot of Justin Bieber every year when you're in early childhood. Okay, which is weird, but a thing. Okay, so both parent or the groups of parents and the groups of administrators and teachers both pointed out in that scene that they really liked how the kids were initiating their behavior, like initiating either getting help or they were initiating coming over to help. But they had different reasons as to why they thought that was really important. So the red are the teachers. And the teachers said, oh, this really helps their independence. Oh, this tells me that they're able to work without me. They don't need me all the time, and that's really important. The parents said, oh, this really shows that they're paying attention to the world around them. They're showing concern for those who are not themselves, and that's what I really like about it. Those are two very different ways of seeing the same thing, and that's where the culturalness of all of this this video cued ethnography, that's how it works, is that people are watching the same film, but they're picking up on very different kinds of things. But anyway, I wanted to show you that they both liked that, but they had very different reasons as to why. We always ask them, what about this works in your school? Like, what are the practices that you see in your school? And this is where we get to some of the depressing part of my talk, according to my children, who I practiced with last night. So this talk is very depressing. So when we asked, would these practices work in your school, almost always the teachers and administrators said no. And the reason that they said no, again, in almost every case, had this weird thing about vocabulary. Vocabulary came up over and over and over and over again. So when they talked about this film, for example, a teacher said, I just noticed that it was their language. I could see that their language, meaning the language of the kids in the film, was very developed. the way they were interacting, the vocabulary they're using, which in our typical bilingual classroom, you know, it's not that level of vocabulary they use. These are how they talked about, these are the reasons that they gave why the practices in the film would not work at their school with their kids. Now remember, these are the same, they're sharing demographics. They're even sharing demographics of the origin countries of the children in the schools. And we told them that they shared demographics with the classroom in the film. But it's almost like after the film, they forgot. When they saw all these kids moving all over the place, making all these decisions, it's like they forgot, kind of, that we're talking about the same kids. And they said things like the vocabulary is limited, meaning the kids at our school, they're lacking the vocabulary, they don't have English competency, sometimes they lack the vocabulary. So this happened over and over and over. And when you're an anthropologist and a pattern like that happens, you start trying to figure out what is behind the pattern, because patterns mean a lot in anthropology. The other crazy thing they said is that they linked vocabulary with deficit ideas about parents. So when they said our kids lack vocabulary, the reason that they lack vocabulary is because their parents, and in almost every case they named immigration as a factor of why those parents aren't so great. Migrant parents weren't born here, parents don't speak English at home. So one of the pre-K teachers said they haven't had the vocabulary with mom and dad, maybe they're migrant workers and they don't have the time to sit down. When they talked about the kids in the film, they talked about how their vocabulary was really high. They had lots of conversations, opportunities to talk, they had a rich vocabulary, lots of literacy. So very kind of, again, of all the things you could say, vocabulary is the one that came up all the time. And this was really linked to them, to the teachers and administrators we interviewed, that they must have good educated families. So one administrator says, that makes me think, just looking at the class even closer, that some of their vocabulary was a little bit higher. So that told me that some of the kids there have had more support at home, maybe some more education at home. So there's this connection that's being made over and over in our data between vocabulary and parents, and whether or not parents are helpful to their children. This was super confusing to us. I at least, I can just speak for myself, is that this seems so arbitrary to me. I'm not in literacy. I'm not like an early childhood literacy specialist. So I was really like, what is the deal with, why is vocabulary like the reigning decision maker of how a child gets something or doesn't get something? Now, if you recall, we're collecting data during 2011 to 2014, and this is like the rise of the word gap argument, the 30 million word thing. It is kind of, when I start paying attention, and our whole research team starts paying attention to these word gap stories that are popping up everywhere. There's huge like presidential convenings on the word gap. There's all kinds of things that are happening. And we're like, what in the world is this? So this is my 30-second, this is the only amount of time I'm giving it in my talk, my 30-second rundown of the word gap situation. And this is the really most important part you need to know about the word gap argument. So in the 1980s, Hart and Risley, I have no idea, I've never seen pictures of them, so I'll just call them they. They did some research where they spent time with 42 children in Kansas City. And they originally had them in 4 economic groups, and they wanted to understand how many words they heard. And so they spent time with 42 families. And they divided them up into 4 economic groups. And when they rewrote the whole study in 1995, which I think is when their book came out, they made it into 3 economic groups. And all of the participants were either white or African American. And they put them into 3 groups: professional, working, and welfare class. And you can see the racial results of those groups. So whiteness gets connected to professionalism, blackness gets connected to welfare, and then out of that, the conclusion or the finding that everybody's grabbing onto in this word gap thing is that professional kids hear 30 million more words than welfare class. That's why they're so successful. Are you buying it? Are you in it with me? Okay. So while this may seem like, when I say it, I'm super sarcastic and passionate, my face is probably red because it makes me angry, everyone in the world disagreed. They loved it. Everybody bought into it. It was everywhere. And like, it wasn't a political thing. Everybody just really bought into this idea about vocabulary gaps. And it was so powerful that not only did it enter the discourse of the teachers, but the teachers told us that they wouldn't be able to give the practices in the film to their own children in the classroom because of vocabulary. Because they already anticipated, not even knowing the children necessarily, that their vocabulary was going to be low based on how they looked and who their families were. So this is still not the craziest part. So remember that scene, the scene of the girl asking for help with the 21? So we showed that to first graders in lots of different schools. And when we showed them to first graders, remember that the parents and the teachers had different ideas about the film, but they liked the practices. The kids, every single kid in our focus group interviews thought the kids were bad. They thought they were bad. They thought they weren't learning anything. That boy needs to sit down. No puedes levantar sin permiso, sin levantar la mano. You can't get up without permission. You have to raise your hand. No siguen las reglas. They don't follow the rules. That's how they're talking about the kids in the film. About this scene in particular, this is one of the many conversations I had with kids about it. Diego, no, because only the teacher goes up. So he's explaining to me, he's trying to convince me why it's so bad what the kids are doing. And I have to admit, I was not a good ethnographer in some of these interviews because my face started getting like, are you serious? Like, really? Because when all the kids kept saying it, I started getting incredulous. Like is there a camera, like that old candid camera show running behind me? Like, why do these kids hate this movie so much? It's starting to be personal, because I spent a lot of time working on it. But they thought the kids were not good. So no, because only the teacher goes up. Do you feel like that was good learning? No. You don't think it's right to go up there? See, that's a terrible ethnographic question, but it is the one that I was kind of like, really? That's like as leading as you can get, right? No, but he corrects me. That's how strong this is. He corrects me, and I'm intimidating. That's how strong deep down this was. No, because the little kids went up to teach the kid. That's not right. Can you do that in your class? No, because our teacher gets mad. Do you wish you could do that? Yes. When your friends have questions or when you have questions, what do? Raise your hand. Their general response to the film was like, these kids are terrible, super misbehaved, not following any of the rules. And so their kind of understanding of learning, what it means to be a learner, what it means to be in the process of learning was obviously being shaped by the lack of certain dynamic learning experiences. They were not able, if they had an idea, to act upon that idea in most cases. And they were really the truth tellers in all of this, explaining their experience. And so their understandings of learning told us a lot about the classrooms. We also spent some time in their classrooms to see, but we really relied on their explanations of their classroom. So in our kind of analytic time with all of this data, we saw that some kids, according to all the people we worked with, some kids deserved and could handle agency. And some kids did not deserve it and could not handle it. And the defining reason was vocabulary. And the secondary reason, but could turn out to be the primary reason, was who their families were, who their parents were. So the thing that confused us, like this is kind of heartbreaking, but the thing that was really confusing to us is it's not like these teachers and administrators were bad people. They really cared about the families and communities that they were working with. They were dedicated. They were in, some of them more than others, in having to play the role of teacher and counselor and social worker sometimes and community liaison. And they were doing all of these roles that are really complicated that a lot of us might not be able to do, and they were doing it. And the families, for the most part in these schools, had nice connections with the teachers. So if teachers, why would vocabulary be so powerful enough to override their ideas about their care for the children and somehow justify not offering practices they thought were good? So what would justify that? So it's kind of a long story, but I was at lunch and I thought this had to do a lot with whiteness and maintaining certain practices in kind of a privilege for certain kids, where certain kids have access to those opportunities for learning and other kids don't. And so I was going to use Zeus Leonardo's critical whiteness work, which if you don't know is fantastic. And I was having lunch with him to kind of basically tell him what I was going to do for this article and this analysis, and he got real quiet, which I thought then he hated everything I just said, because I just explained to him what I just explained to you, and then he got real quiet, and I was like, oh, he's going to kick me out, he doesn't want to be my friend, and I was really freaking out, because he was quiet for like a minute. And then he goes, have you ever read Charles Mills? And I said, no. And he said, what you're describing is exactly what he warns happens all the time. So I went back and spent some time reading. And what I'd like to talk about today are 3 concepts that come from Charles Mills' ideas. Charles Mills he calls himself an oppositional philosopher, which is kind of cool. Some people call him a black liberationist philosopher. But he really is and I'm not a philosopher, so if any of you are and you hear me say something wacky, just see my intention. See my intention what I'm trying to do. So there's 3, his main kind of ideas about the racial contract, and the racial contract is his critique of the social contract, or this idea that people give up a little bit of their freedom in order to be protected so that they can have most of their freedom. And they can have rights and exercise those privileges, and that those privileges and rights are shared, are equal. Once you give up a little bit, then the state protects you as equal citizens. And that's part of civil society and all of that kind of stuff. So Charles Mills says that's never been true, and that's definitely not true right now. That it's not this equal system of everybody giving up a little bit of their power or their freedom and then having equal exercise of rights and privileges. That in actuality, this is a racial contract. This is white supremacy, basically. This is white people creating a system where those rights and privileges are shared among white people, and we make sure, because I'm one of those people, as that power is maintained within white people. And this is a global kind of understanding. So the racial contract, and this is something else that's really interesting about him, is that the racial contract is not metaphorical. It is actual. It is real. It is traceable. It has genealogy. You can see it, like in written textual evidential forms. So there's 3 ideas within this critique of the social contract, or his idea about the racial contract I want to talk about today that has to do with our stuff. This idea of a line between personhood and subpersonhood. And then this idea that if you're really good or you do these certain things, you can cross. You can go from being a subperson to a full person if you just do some stuff. So that false promise is what he calls a false promise. And then the third thing is an epistemology of ignorance, a way of maintaining that line to make it seem as if the line doesn't exist, or that it's really easy, meritorious, just cross over. So I want to talk about those 3 things and what they have to do with the word gap. So in this idea of personhood and subpersonhood, you have to think about, in your world or from your vantage point, who walks into situations in their everyday life assuming that they have rights and privileges and that they will not be checked on them, and who is always having to defend that they should have those rights and privileges, or having to prove that they are worthy of those rights and privileges. Charles Mills says this is racial. And in education, I would agree with that, but I'd also say there's some other things going on. There's some other ways, and you probably know in your work other ways that this personhood, subpersonhood line gets created. But it's this thing that happens to, and this is why he says it happens, is because as human beings, we probably couldn't stand the idea of the disparity that exists in our world, or even if we just take education, the disparity that happens, that some children get stuff and other children don't, is so vast and big, globally speaking, or even within our country, or even within our state, or even within our city, that in order to stomach that, you can't walk around your whole life stomaching that. And so in order to have that idea exist, but not have to feel so bad about it, you have to think about those that don't have those rights and privileges, or where that disparity is, as not full people. Slightly less deserving than you are, slightly. And so that line between personhood and subpersonhood means that some people are going to arrive in situations and be seen fully as deserving, and others are not. The other thing about the line is this idea that you can cross. That if you just do things, if you just play your cards right, or you just do these particular things, which Mills is going to argue are often things that white people do naturally, if you just do that stuff, then you can cross over to full personhood and have exercise of those rights and privileges. But the falsity Charles Mills talks about is that anytime a critical mass of people start crossing that line that full persons don't really like, guess what they do? They just move the line. To change what the line is, or they move it slightly. So in early childhood, this is the best way for me to give examples. So in early childhood, we used to say, okay, send your kids to kindergarten, right? 30 years ago, send your kids to kindergarten. If you send them to kindergarten, they're going to do much better in school, and then they're going to go to college, and then they're going to get a job, right? We've said, so then we just said, okay, kindergarten's not good enough, now you need to go to pre-K. We tell parents, you need to play with your kids. Then we said, okay, now you need to sit down and do flashcards with your kids. Oh no, flashcards are bad. Now you need to take them to story times. No, story times aren't good enough. Now you need to sit down and you need to play iPad with them, but you need to do it with them, right? You need to get technology in your house. So when these things keep changing in vocabulary, this idea of that kids need a certain amount of vocabulary to cross the line to deserve certain kinds of practices is just one more historical thing about if you just do this, and you can cross over and you'll have all the rights and privileges. If you think about it, it used to be that a bachelor's degree was what you needed to cross the line, right? It's not anymore. The line shifts, the line moves around. The other thing that's crazy in early childhood is people make a ton of money off that line. This is the part where I get really... People make a ton of money off of moving people across the line. That any baby can read nonsense. Think about all the interventions that people make money off of because of that line, at the expense of maintaining this situation. So Charles Mills says, thus on matters related to race, the racial contract prescribes for its signatories an inverted epistemology, an epistemology of ignorance. Because we can't walk around knowing that all the time, right? We would go insane. So we have to create an epistemology of ignorance, a particular pattern of localized and global cognitive dysfunctions, which are psychologically and socially functional, like they work for our own functionality, but they are actually globally dysfunctional, producing the ironic outcome that whites will in general be unable to understand the world they themselves have made. In fact, white people are often better off and are more successful the less they know about this unfair situation. So he calls that an epistemology of ignorance. So naming this reality brings it into the necessary theoretical focus for these issues to be honestly addressed. That is part of the key of what he starts talking about, is this need to honestly address and label the situation. Those who pretend not to see them, who claim not to recognize the picture I have sketched, this is at the end of the Racial Contract book, by the way, are only continuing the epistemology of ignorance required by the original racial contract. As long as this studied ignorance persists, the racial contract will only be rewritten rather than being torn up altogether, and justice will continue to be restricted to just us. So part of these ideas about Charles Mills and the word gap is that somehow this idea about vocabulary being an indicator of whether a child was ready for agentic kind of learning experiences fit very nicely into this idea that some people have to earn the right to certain things, and other children show right up and have them. And this is the part that's like, to me, because I spend my time in lots and lots and lots of early childhood programs, and the racial differences, just, you can have some exceptions along the way, but the racial differences of when you walk into a classroom with wealthy white children and when you walk into a classroom with Mexican immigrant kids, the difference of how they are talked to, the learning experiences they have access to, the ways in which they're told to think about learning is really different, you guys. It is super significant, the differences of that experience. And I think that Mills at least helps us try to think about, to kind of create this opportunity for us to think about the ways in which we subtly go along with the situation. And we kind of subtly are working our way either across the line, or we're working on not really wanting to think very much about that line's existence, depending on where we are. And maybe by doing all of that, are maintaining the system over and over and over again. So this is the part in the talk, by the way, that my kids said I should tell a joke, because it's really depressing. And when we got to this, I was so into it, you can tell, right? Like, white people kind of give away their emotions usually with my face turns all red. But I turned to look at my kids. Their eyes were so big. They were so big and sad. So after talking to them last night, we came up with a better way of ending this talk, because it was going to end right there. But they said that was not a good idea. So I have 2 more minutes, and then I'm really interested in your thoughts and your comments. And there's a lot of data that I didn't put in this talk that are in the article or in other articles that we've written. But I wanted to focus on kind of this, the convenient word gap argument just fits so nicely. It was so, it just was like, oh yeah, of course, if we just give them more vocabulary, then that will help them. But that's just like tracking. If you just give them certain classes, they'll catch up. If you give them early childhood programs, that's going to fix everything in the end. And all this stuff that we do, all these promises that we give people about if you just do this, then you'll have the rights and privileges, just all seems to break down in the end. And disparities just continue. And so vocabulary, to me, is this kind of, was used as a sorting mechanism, not consciously, and it's not about a person being nice or unnice, but it is about how we are all participating within a system that has made it logical for some people to be those rights and privileges, and other ones have to earn them. And so that, in early childhood, to me, that seems really problematic, especially if everyone's trying to get into college eventually at some point. So, okay, so what I want to end with is much more hopeful. And what I want to end with is go back to the very beginning of that year we spent in that classroom with those first graders who had no line. There's no line in their classroom. They walked in, and I'm writing a book about this classroom and about all of the stuff I'm talking about today. And the minute they set their foot into the door, they had all the rights and privileges. They didn't have to earn it. They didn't have to be trained, which is a lot of what the teachers we talked to said they need to be trained before we give them that. They need to prove that they can handle it before we give it to them. Those kids walked into the door, and they had all the rights and privileges of an agentic learning experience. They didn't have to do anything to earn it. So that kind of mentality meant that the entire classroom was a different kind of space for them. And all the things that they demonstrated and all the capabilities that they expanded had a lot to do, in my opinion, with that intention around the children, or that way of looking at them and looking at their families. So when we finished the film of all the kids and in the classroom, before we took it to all the other schools, we showed it to the kids and their parents, not together, But we showed it to we showed it to the parents, we showed it to the kids, and we showed it to the teachers, and they all gave us feedback, and we re-edited or changed things. But we really wanted the kids to to tell us if this really represented their classroom, and we wanted to know a little bit about what they thought about learning. These were our first interviews with kids, and if any of you do work with kids, your first interviews with kids are terrible. So don't judge me or my questions when you see this. But this is a pretty typical way that they talked about themselves when they watched themselves in the video. Now remember, every single kid in all the focus groups thought the kids were bad, right? So we started asking, when they showed the film, they said, we ask a lot of questions. That was something they noticed about themselves. And I said, we started talking about, they mentioned, so there's a scene in the film where the teacher goes and sits down with the kids, and the kids are presenting something to the class. And they all wanted to watch that part multiple times. They liked seeing their teacher sitting down with them. They thought they remembered that, and they thought they wanted to see that multiple times. And so my question to them was, why should kids ask questions, not just adults? There's always a lot of ums in these, but I took a lot of them out. I just kept one in, so I was real. Because kids want to find out too, just in case kids want to find out because we want to know why. I'm just saying, see, these are my terrible ethnographic questions again. I'm just saying some teachers think that kids should be really quiet and that they shouldn't ask a lot of questions. And some teachers think that kids should ask a lot of questions. Yeah, I would ask questions. So what do you think? Because kids have to find out. It's better to be curious. Kids have to understand. So I think that what kinds of learning experiences young children have really do impact the way that they see learning. And it really does impact the way that they see their families around them. When this teacher also, I don't think, coincidentally, had parents in her classroom all the time helping out in curriculum, not with parties, with curriculum, with actual intellectual activity in the classroom. That's significant, right? Okay. So with that, I think I'm going to end. This is the citation for the paper, and open it up to all of you for questions. And thank you so much for being here and participating. So I think we have about 10 minutes or so for questions. So I'm ready. Mm-hmm.
Did you talk to the teachers in the classroom that you observed, and either before or after, and did they ever bring up vocabulary, or once they read the study, did they talk about that?
That's such a good question. Thanks for asking that question. We spent a year, so there were a lot of interviews, and then we interviewed the teacher at the beginning of the second year and the beginning of the third year of our research study, so after we had already been out. There is, I mean, maybe Kiyomi knows differently, but I don't think there's one mention of vocabulary ever. It wasn't a part of any of the discussions. It never got brought up. We knew by the third year that it was coming up in a lot of things. But she is going to read the manuscript of the book, and that will be part of the epilogue, because I'm actually showing the film to all the kids now, and they're in 7th grade. And I really want to see what their ideas about learning are as an epilogue to the book. So, not to, push my book. All right, moving on. All right, other questions? Mm-hmm.
Did any of the teachers from other classes who watched the video, did any of them have a reaction like, oh, I would like to do this, I could do this? Did anyone have a positive, like what you were expecting that maybe it would inspire them? And if they did, what do you think might have, if that even happened, do you have any ideas of why those teachers?
So thank you for that question too, and I meant to bring that up and forgot. So out of 42 teachers and administrators, 38, there were 4 exceptions. 2 teachers, 2 administrators. The 2 teacher exceptions I think are interesting. Both of them are Latinx immigrants themselves, both male, both relatively new teachers. And when they watched the film, it was just me and them in one of their classrooms. And when we watched the film, they didn't say anything for a while. And one of them looked sick, and I thought, does he have the flu? Like, what's going? And you can tell that I'm not good with silence. It's the same as the Zeus Leonardo story. But I start panicking, like, why is it so quiet? Nobody's saying anything. And they were really upset, like really angry and upset. And when I finally said, like, was there something in the film that, like, did I say something, or like, is everything okay? And he said, I want to show you something. And he took me over to the door in the front of the hallway, and he showed me their 10-minute segmented schedule of the day. And he said, we have to be horizontally within 10 minutes of each other and not 10 minutes away from this schedule all day. He said, I would have no time to hear children's stories. I don't have any opportunity to do what this teacher is doing, because every 10 minutes I know what I'm told that I have to shift to something else. And they were visibly angry that they couldn't do what the film said. And it was a really amazing interview. But it really left me thinking ethically too about what is it like to be in a situation to really, really want to do things and know that that's best for the children. His concern was kids will come in and say, this happened to my grandpa. There's a scene in the film where a kid describes his grandfather getting Lyme disease, and it goes on for like 8 minutes. Not all 8 minutes of it are in the film. Everyone would, well, I wouldn't be bored, but maybe other people watching it would be bored. But he goes on and on and on. The kids are like spellbound and listening and asking him clarifying questions. And the teacher's just kind of sitting back with the kids while this young one is describing his grandfather having Lyme disease. And that really triggered stuff for the two teachers who I was interviewing, saying, like, I can't even do that. I can't have it. A kid tells me something crazy happened in their family, and I can't take 5 minutes to have the class listen to that story and join in. And so that kind of, like, it's not just good practice, but like even able to be culturally relevant in that way, to listen to those stories and have those be a part of it, that was really upsetting to him. So those 4 exceptions to me also locate a lot of pain among teachers. And there might have been pain that didn't come out in the interviews, but those were our exceptions in the study.
I was going to actually I had a question that I think relates to what you just said about that exception. And my question originally was, how did the teachers who watched the film, right, who kind of said our kids can't do that, which is a very kind of deficit framing.
Sure.
How did they make sense of the fact that the kids in the video, given that they were similar in demographics, were, engaged in it in agentic learning? And I think I hear in that exception, in that story from the exception, from that teacher, is that it's sort of kind of looking not through a deficit lens, but looking through a structural argument. This is kind of nature of learning environment that's being cultivated.
Yeah. So there weren't exceptions to your question, and I want to get to the second part of your question, but there weren't exceptions of people saying, yeah, we really do that in our school. The exception was who you blamed.
Right.
Did you blame a systemic kind of institutional situation, or did you blame the families? And I guess what I'm saying is 38 out of the 42 blamed the families. But those 4 exceptions were thinking much more systematically about what was going on. Now, the teachers, when we introduced the film and started the focus groups, we would always say, this comes from a school serving mostly children of Latino immigrants. This is they have like 65 to 75%, depending on the year, free and reduced lunch. So we kind of gives a little bit of demographic information. And I usually gave the demographic information that closely matched their school. But what we were finding is that at the end, they forgot. Like by the end of the 20 minutes, it wasn't referenced again that they were so similar demographically. It's like it was hard, I think for many reasons, it was hard to accept that the kids in the film were just like their kids. They had to create a reason why they were different, which is part of Mills's argument.
Which became, so vocabulary became that.
It became, and it's arbitrary, but it became the thing in the moment to justify why we can't do that stuff at our school, but yet I know I'm watching it happen in this school. So, but It could have been anything. It could have been lots of things. It just happened that the word gap was really popular right when we were collecting data, and so that happened to be the thing. And again, this has nothing to do with care and concern and professionalism or anything like that. But this has to do with a much larger thing that we're all participating in, and often maintain something that if we knew that, we would never want to be participatory in that, is what I think.
I'm really curious about, was the classroom teacher, did you attribute this agentic environment to her and her beliefs and her pre-service training, or was this something that maybe the school saw as part of their mission? Because I'm just thinking about the children having this wonderful experience here with all this agency, and then they go on to the next grade, and it's a different environment. Just thinking ahead to what you were going to hopefully look at, now that they're in 7th grade. And then I was curious about, did other teachers in the school, did they look in a positive light towards this teacher, or in a, her classroom's a mess? So I'm just really curious about her own situation within that.
The school was supportive in that for 2 reasons. One, teachers had more autonomy than maybe as usual, but definitely than the 2 male teachers in the one school were telling me. They don't have that stricted, you have to be on this thing at this time and this day. But they definitely had 8-week plans and year-long plans. But there was a lot of autonomy. Teachers could choose their own curriculum, actually, in there. And there was only 2 classes per grade, so that helped with the autonomy situation. The other way that the school helped was we made a deal. And the deal was, if things go terribly south, you will not affect their merit pay. Like, dock me somehow. I don't know. I'll give you some stuff I own or something. Like, don't take it out of the teachers. And they allowed us to be like a buffer for a year, basically, so that if anything happened to the test scores, it wouldn't impact the teachers, which gave them a lot more freedom to take risks, for sure. The other thing is that the teacher had a partner teacher who was also part of the study, but we didn't end up showing her film all around for a whole bunch of reasons. But they worked together on everything. They were like a team. And it meant that when they were sometimes ridiculed by other teachers at the school, honestly, like one day we were filming, and even though they see the red light on the camera, they walk by the camera and say to me, while the teacher's sitting down and the kids are all over the school doing this thing where they're trying to figure out what things are different states of matter, and they have these clipboards and they're all wandering around without adults all over the school. And the teacher comes by and looks at the teacher sitting, a teacher, not the 1st grade teachers, comes by and looks at me almost into the camera. And she says, "Oh, it must be easy to be a teacher in that classroom." And I was just like, what? No, that wouldn't have been professional. So I didn't do that. But there was this kind of, there was a lot of support, and there was also some hostility from certain teachers. And there was a lot of concern. They changed the rule the beginning of the following year. The teacher in the film told us that kids have to have an adult with them at all times in any place at all in the school. So the wandering around that those kids did that year, that I was arguing was beautiful. And there's a fence. There's a giant fence around the whole thing. What are they going to do? But they changed that rule because of that class. So things are never all one thing. There was a lot of support, but there was also some obstacles.
Maybe it's just because I'm interested in literacy in general, but you mentioned that the vocabulary idea seemed arbitrary, right? And I'm in secondary literacy, but given the prevalence of standardized vocabulary tests for academic success and academic readiness, and how pervasive that is at the elementary level, it seems like there's something else going on there too, with the fact that words and what words you have and you don't have are what determine the access to the kind of education that you get, particularly English words, right?
Right.
Other kinds of words.
Right. I think I can see what you're saying. I think when I talk about arbitrary, I'm thinking even more macro than that, that the reason that the kids are not going to do well when they get to secondary or when they're taking their SATs or whatever has something to do with vocabulary, and not the fact that their parents might get deported, or that they don't have economic stability, or that they can't vote, or that, do you know what I mean? Like, why that? And not all of these other systemic reasons for why these disparities could exist later on.
So as I listen to this, and I really enjoyed your presentation, I'm thinking about the fact that there's a sort of long-standing tradition of rooting lower achievement, lower intelligence, in fact, to gaps in vocabulary. This is not, I mean, the word gap, it's new, I guess, in the sense that it's this particular study and sort of, you know,
how Pitbull picked up on
defining
it.
just how many words one would need to know. But we could go back to the 60s. I mean, this is part of conversations that have historically been in, I'd say, education around the differences, both socioeconomically, but often in social class more broadly, but they also are conflated to race.
Yeah.
So in other words, what I guess I'm saying is there's this existing narrative that these teachers are able to enter into, and they don't have to question it because perhaps they have evidence or they think they have evidence that would support it, but there's a whole sort of common sense that's built into this longer trajectory of discourse that then they're just picking up, and they don't even realize how their actions then get framed by what's possible or not possible because it already exists.
Yeah, absolutely.
Until you present it to them.
Yeah, the historical making of that common sense is a lot of how Mills talks about, and that record, even when it comes to vocabulary or conflating like your quality of language, whether it's like a language or your vocabulary or words or whatever, connected to race, is something that you could do a whole genealogy on, like the historical recordness and deliberate decision making that goes into that. It's not something metaphorical, but it's something actually real, which is what Mills talks about. What time are we time? All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And I'm happy to hear your comments and get emails and yell at me, but yell at me through email. Don't yell at me. I'm not good. Thank you so much for coming.